Welcome to Let's Talk. This is Hart Hagan, and I'm joined by Rolf Friis. Rolf, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Hart. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. We're on Forward Radio, 106.5 WFMP FM Louisville, and we're going to talk about current issues and also some of our favorite people in independent media, and then we're going to talk about some issues that may or may not be current, but they're more evergreen. So, Rolf, you wanted to talk about how the COVID is impacting the environment?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen a lot of different articles in the news over the last couple of weeks, just on the effects the pandemic's having worldwide on the environment, as well as on just the way the wildlife is interacting with the environment now. We've seen a lot of changes here in a short amount of time, and I find it really fascinating. Um, but like some of the examples I'm talking about, first on the wildlife side, we see like in Florida, the leatherback turtles, where there's a migration to the beach. They lay the eggs. There's been a lot of issues with that in the last few years, as far as they're losing a lot of those baby turtles. But there's been a huge resurgence of the turtle eggs and the turtle hatchlings this year in Florida, so that's amazing. We've seen things in Argentina where there are literally mountain lions roaming through the streets. This is going on in China as well as Russia, various cities in Europe, where we're seeing all this wildlife come into the city. Even things like monkeys, just absolutely amazing to see. And this is all because humans are at home. We're not out doing what we do, and so the animals, when the cat's away, the mouse will play. And here they are; they're out running the streets, having a good time, and it's just worldwide. As far as the climate angle, the pollution angle, there's been a lot of charts and graphs that I've taken a look at. The first one came out over Wuhan in China, just how the levels of pollution, the levels of carbon in the atmosphere had dropped significantly. Then there's reports about Los Angeles, which is known to not have very clean air in general. I grew up, I kind of thought of LA with smog, bad air. They now are saying that LA currently has the cleanest air going in the world, which is absolutely incredible. A city that size, that many people. And again, this is all from people out not driving around. All the transportation trucks that are normally there aren't necessarily there. All the activities that are going on, all that's been shelved. And here we have this amazing resurgence of clean air, which of course will lead to cleaner water. We've got animals running everywhere, and it's just a beautiful thing to think that there is some kind of beauty that comes out of this pandemic. It's amazing, because you wouldn't have thought that, but this is actually a beautiful angle, and we need to learn from this. And once this pandemic is over, we need to continue, or we need to find a way to continue the low pollution levels and just lead to a more sustainable society.
Right. Well, you were talking about, before we started recording, you were talking about how it all gets back to sustainability for you. Talk about that.
Sustainability in general, as an activist, I try to see what all the issues are that are going around, and really, when you look at everything, as you step back, you look at everything, you see that it all ties together. But what's the main thing that is affected by all of this is sustainability. So you look at various aspects, various issues that we're having. If you take a step back and look at it, it ties back to sustainability. So we talk about the economy. We need something that's sustainable. We need health care for everyone, because that's what's sustainable. We have 68,000 people die a year without health care. That's not sustainable. You talk about the pollution levels and what it does to wildlife, what it does to our drinking water, our air. You look at things like Flint water. That is not sustainable. So everything ties back to that. Even stuff like racism and sexism. We're all a society. We're all a community. We live together day by day. If there's a lot of racism, sexism in your community, that's not going to be sustainable long term either. So that's what it all comes down to. Justice issues are all about sustainability, everything. So what I want to see is a society that not only works today, but it's going to work tomorrow. It's going to work next year. It's going to work in 20 years. If we have some issues we got to solve, if we got to stop a leak, we can stop a leak, but then we got to figure out how do we make sure it never springs a leak again. So we got to be forward thinking in what we're doing and not just kind of chasing our tails, putting out fires as we go.
Well, what do you think mainly needs to change? I mean, if Rolf Friis was king of the world, what would you change? What policies would you enact if you had no resistance and you could make anything happen?
I wouldn't say it's a policy, but I'm probably going to make a few people angry with this answer here. But that's not, I've never shied away from that anyways. But if I could only change one thing, the main thing I would change, of course, being a sustainability guy, is I would get rid of capitalism. Capitalism, it's totally unsustainable. This is a system of infinite growth on a finite world. It's by definition not sustainable. We're gonna use all our resources. We're tearing up the environment. We're killing the air. It's taking such a toll on the workers. Just completely unsustainable. So I would move away from that. I don't know what the answer is long term. It'd be nice to have some sort of utopia like a Star Trek Next Generation type of situation, but we're a long ways from that. So a social democracy would definitely be much more sustainable, as in the Scandinavian style. For the short term, I think we can go from where we're at to that real quick and then kind of progress from there. But I see capitalism as the number one issue.
Well, how do you define capitalism?
Profit over everything else is how I would define it.
Right.
Profit, and then profit, and then profit. And if you have a little bit of time left over, I guess we can look at some other stuff. But it's mainly profit, profit, and profit.
Right. One thing that I see in our, I call it the free market fraud. It's like I used to believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, and the free market. And I have reasons for not believing in any of those things anymore. And I realized that in each case, somebody had an agenda when they taught that to me. But then you kind of wake up and it doesn't all add up. So free market is like, yes, markets exist. Yes, market forces exist. Yes, there's such a thing as supply and demand. Yes, supply and demand and money provide some incentives for people, but free market is something that was just invented. And one of the main, you could boil it down to about 5 or 6 principles. And one of the main principles is this idea that private ambition leads to public benefit. That if you just allow people to pursue their own selfish ends, then that leads to what's best for everybody. And I'm thinking, why should I believe that? Why should I believe that selfishness is the key to everything else? And it actually doesn't work. That's one of the problems with capitalism. Another problem with capitalism is thinking that we actually have it. We have socialism for the rich. We have a defense industry whose primary purpose is to put money into the pockets of rich people. To increase the wealth of rich people. It's like poor people and middle class people don't need all these wars. But another thing about the Pentagon and the defense spending is that it's what I call upwards wealth redistribution. So we're taking money out of the pockets of the taxpayer and putting it into the pockets of rich people. One reason for that is procurement, where Boeing or Northrop Grumman or whoever it is builds planes or tanks or submarines or bombs, and the government buys those things from this company that is only making them for its one customer, the government, or maybe foreign governments, because we have a big, huge arms sales industry. But it's all this really destructive stuff that is that capitalism? It's I don't know. I don't know how you define capitalism, but it's these terms that get thrown around. And I would just like to take everybody back to grade school and say, look, everything you were taught about American history is wrong. Everything you've been taught about the American economy is wrong. And we could go on and on. Everything you've been taught about America on the world stage is wrong. So How do we get off on that?
I don't know, but to get a little philosophical, uh, well, go ahead. Never mind.
So we were talking about like what's happened currently that any current events that come to mind as far as you'd like to talk about. So what I'd like to talk about is how the progressives like Bernie Sanders and AOC are trying to kind of justify why they voted yes to this stimulus bill that was the biggest corporate giveaway in the history of the world. You've got trillions of dollars just throwing money at corporations, and then the rest of us get $1,200, and hopefully we're happy with that. But Bernie Sanders is trying to say that he was that I don't know. Help me with the facts of that, because Bernie and AOC are just trying to say that they had to vote for this bill. I'm saying you didn't have to vote for that bill. You're in Congress. So Bernie Sanders submitted to a 96-0 unanimous vote on the bill. And AOC, there was what am I trying to say? There was a unanimous vote, and the unanimous vote didn't work, so there was a voice vote, and AOC is not one of the ones who voted no on the voice vote, and she said she would have voted against it if she had had the chance. Well, you had the chance to vote against it in the voice vote. So I'm just, what the current event that I would like to talk about is these progressives turn out to be not on our side. I mean, Bernie Sanders is a great guy, but man, he folds when the chips are down. He just, when he has the most possible power is when he caves in and licks the boot of the establishment.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was heartbreaking to see. It really was.
So what's going on there?
First off, before we get into this any further, let's just say that we are not anti-Bernie people. We are
Right,
not
right.
anti-progressive people, but you can't be sycophants. You have to hold your people to account. So if you can't even keep your house clean, how are you going to, expand into the rest of Congress? So we have to hold AOC, Ilhan Omar, Bernie, Tulsi, the rest of them accountable when they're not doing the right things. And that's what we're doing here. So let's just be clear about that up front
Sure.
before the people start slinging the insults your way, my way. Uh, longtime Bernie supporter for me. I believe you are as well.
Yeah.
It's never pleasant to have to say things, but Bernie has made decisions. We have to live with those now, and we have to discuss it, and we have to learn from it. So the stimulus, we basically didn't get anything out of it. We got crumbs, absolute crumbs. A one-time $1,200. We have Steve Mnuchin trying to tell us that somehow lasts 10 weeks. I don't know where he lives, but let me know where $1,200 can let you live for 10 weeks, and I'm moving there tomorrow. AOC clearly didn't say no on the voice vote, and if anybody has heard that tape, there are no women that speak out. I heard maybe 1 to 2 men. I think you said you heard 3. They're definitely men, though.
At most,
Yeah, at
and none of
most.
them were women. Right.
Absolutely not. So, unless she's like throwing her voice or something, that's not happening. So basically, she's just pandering. Again, she did nothing. It was her time to fight for us. She didn't do anything. She gave one speech in a video, but she melted down. Bernie melted down. He wants to take credit. He sent out emails asking for money, takes credit for the $1,200, the unemployment, and it turns out that wasn't even his doing. That came from Michael Bennett, of all people, who I'm not a fan of, but he did that. Bernie is using that to fundraise, and of course now, with his fundraising, if you donated to Bernie, you donated to the DNC at this point, which is, I learned that lesson in 2016. I didn't do that this time around. I donated the minimum to Bernie, Tulsi, and Mike Gravel just to get them on the stage and to have that individual donor. But I wasn't going to throw my money away. I learned last time. I think there was a large percentage of people that learned this time. They're not going to do that in the future. But these are our leaders, our progressive leaders: Bernie, AOC, Ro Khanna. People want to lump Sherrod Brown in there. I don't know about that, but these people are not fighting for us at all. And it's given me the picture that we don't have anybody fighting for us. Bernie is a great man, a good person, but he even has the right policies, but he wasn't the fighter in the end that we needed him to be. We needed another leader above him. So thank you, Bernie, for waking up a lot of people, turning a lot of people toward progressive policies, for changing the Overton window, for changing what even the crooked Democrats have to pretend to talk about even. It's all because of Bernie, but when it came time, we needed him to win this race. We needed it. When Bloody Monday happened, as Kyle Kalinske called it, Bernie never recovered. It was his race to lose at that point, and he and his campaign could not recover. One of the reasons is he let too many people in his campaign from like the Center of American Progress and these establishment types that don't agree with his policies, but they want the job. And so here they are, running a campaign for something they don't necessarily believe in. A lot of these people were pushing Bernie to drop out sooner than he did. We needed him to stay through all the way to the convention because last I checked, Biden has dementia. He literally has dementia. He doesn't know what race he's running. He can't distinguish at all times between his wife and his sister. He's talking about people like Corn Pop and 3-0, 3-3-0s and what all this stuff that he's doing. And he doesn't know where he is
But
half the
Rolf,
time.
if you say anything bad about Joe Biden, that means you're supporting Trump.
Yeah, I guess so. So I'll just say that Trump stinks too. So now I'm supporting Biden, and they're supporting them both.
Right, right.
But I won't be voting for either one of them. Not a chance. Not a chance Trump would ever get my vote, ever. And no chance that Biden will ever get my vote. I'm looking at some other people. So,
Well, what do you say to people that say that if you're critical of Biden, it's like supporting Trump? I mean, what do you think about people that are like diehard Biden supporters at this point?
well, first of all, there's something called democracy. So you vet your candidates in that process, and if they have negative aspects, you need to point those out, especially in the primary. It's been frustrating this primary season, 2016 as well, where it's like if you point out anything about a Democratic candidate, then somehow that's going to hurt them in the general, as if somehow the Republicans don't know how to use Google and aren't going to figure these things out. Nobody knew all these things about Biden until we brought it up, apparently, because somehow Trump was never going to figure that out. Nobody knew all these things about Hillary, but apparently Bernie bros, brought that to the forefront. But that's just not true. They know, and Trump's already hitting Biden hard with commercials. So talking about his dementia and the way that he speaks in public and basically his brain is just not there. It's already happening. And even Biden supporters, if you win it, you'd probably hope Bernie would stay in it just so that Trump wasn't dropping commercials already. And here he is already pushing it. So it's going to be brutal for Biden. That Trump, he isn't going to pull the punches. It doesn't matter if it was Bernie or Klobuchar or Buttigieg or whoever. Trump is not going to pull punches in his ads and his speeches, and he's going to come right at people. He's kind of a no mercy guy. So expect it. And to think that we shouldn't bring up these issues to say, hey, we know Biden has these flaws. Trump is going to expose these flaws. Let's talk about it. That's not an attack on your candidate. And by the way, if a candidate or a politician has a past, has a voice vote, has a bill, has anything, any kind of history, talking about that history, what they did, that is not a smear. That's not an attack. It's just not. So if you like a candidate and he did something bad and we talk about it, we're not smearing your candidate. You like a candidate that did something bad. That's just what it is.
So if Biden is so weak, how did he become the likely nominee?
kind of the last man standing. You know, he it just kind of fell in his lap, to be honest. So he was really struggling. The first three contests, he was nowhere to be found. There were people, you know, rumbling about, should he drop out? You know, is Biden done? Uh, but he put a lot into South Carolina, and Bernie couldn't. That's kind of on Bernie as well, because he was, you know, doing impeachment and couldn't campaign in South Carolina. And this is something their campaign talked about. And Bernie pushed that Russiagate stuff. He pushed the impeachment stuff, and look what it did. It left him unable to campaign in South Carolina the way that he wanted. He had to just use surrogates. And speaking of surrogates, we have John Clyburn in South Carolina, who apparently is extremely powerful in the state. And we knew that, but it really showed this time, because the exit polls show that Clyburn endorsed Biden, and 49% of people who voted for Biden did so, you know, based on the recommendation of Clyburn. So that's a powerful guy there in that state.
Last time you were talking about election rigging. And so, I mean, I'm not convinced that there wasn't election rigging going on in South Carolina and in other places.
Oh, I'm sure.
So you're saying that the Clyburn endorsement was essential for Joe Biden. What about election rigging?
Yeah, absolutely as well.
Do we know that, or do we just want it to be true?
We figured Biden was going to win South Carolina. We did, but and I didn't even know, you know, that it would be that close. But what it turned into be was a runaway, and that was the Clyburn endorsement. And you know, just like anywhere else, I don't have any proof of South Carolina, but vote switching, we know it's been happening in multiple primaries the last few years, and I totally expect that. Even in the few states Bernie won early, you know, I think he overcame rigging, and it probably wasn't as close as what they said it was. But that pretty much left the DNC in a position where now Biden has won South Carolina. They realize, and let me say that the DNC is really bad at strategy for the last decade, really bad. So I didn't think they had it in them to change strategy. I thought they were going to go all the way to the convention.
What about Obama's involvement?
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. So I figured it was going to go all the way to the convention, and they would just go to a second round and use the superdelegates to steal it. But we have found out that Obama is definitely the man with the brains in the DNC establishment. That's when he decided to get involved and say, hey, we just had this guy win the state by a huge margin. We're going to consolidate around this guy. So we're going to have Buttigieg make a call to Buttigieg, have him drop out, endorse Biden. We're going to make a call to Klobuchar, have him drop out, endorse Biden. We've got Texas coming up on Super Tuesday. We're going to make a call to Robert Francis O'Rourke. And we'll have him come out from wherever I don't even know where he was. We'll have him come out and endorse Biden, and we'll have Elizabeth Warren stay in.
So you're saying that Obama made a phone call to Buttigieg, to Klobuchar, and to Beto Robert Francis O'Rourke?
Yes, and probably Warren as well.
If that had happened, I would have heard it on CNN. Why didn't CNN say anything about that? Why didn't MSNBC say anything about election interference and all that?
They're paid not to. They're on that same team. So when we talk about our legacy media on cable specifically, and even more specifically MSNBC and CNN, these are corporate entities. So their main thing to do is—
You mean it's not a public service?
Oh no. And you ask yourself, how did we get that way with the news? Just as a quick side note here. Well, why did the news turn into a profit-making thing that it is now? How did it get so deeply entrenched with everything that it is? But oddly enough, in the 80s, 60 Minutes, was a powerhouse show. And I know my parents watched it every single Sunday night.
I did too.
And it was the first news show to reach #1 in the ratings, at which point they were able to advertise heavily, and they started making a lot of money off of advertisements. And that's where kind of the media community looked and said, hey, we can make money on this. We don't just have to inform people. We can start pulling in dollars. So that was a side effect of that. Now, obviously, that wasn't an intentional thing, but that is what happened, and that's kind of, it's as everything in our system is. It's once it takes hold, it spirals out of control. And we have what we have now in 2020, which is we have three corporate entities on cable: CNN, Fox, MSNBC. CNN is the supposed neutral one, is in there. They are just corporate no matter what. They're going to be corporate. They're going to be military industrial. And then you have Fox and you have MSNBC, who are that as well, but they are also direct mouthpieces for the parties. Fox with the Republican Party, MSNBC with the Democratic Party. They're lockstep. So they're not going to say anything out of line. As far as MSNBC, they're not going to say anything out of line with what the DNC wants or promote anything that the DNC wants. And you can see this in their programming, the way that they go after the left time and time again, that if they even talk about the left, which most of the time they won't, but if they do, they will smear us, attack us, so on and so forth, and tell us how we aren't popular, nobody likes our stuff.
Which one are you talking about? Fox News?
MSNBC.
MSNBC. Okay.
Yeah, but you
All
get the same. It might as well be Fox. You could just say, "Hey, them and the Republican Party," the same way that they're the mouthpiece, and with
Well,
Trump
Matt,
even more so.
yeah,
Go ahead.
it sounds like what you're saying reminds me of Matt Taibbi wrote a book called Hate Inc. And he talked about how back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, you had what you had CBS, ABC, and NBC. They all wanted to capture a mass audience, and then cable news came along, and Fox News came along. Then Fox News decided to capture the conservative audience, and then MSNBC came along and wanted to capture the liberal audience. And those audiences are kind of isolated from one another.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, you have these two separate audiences, even though they're both corporate. So I'm a little bit confused as to how that works. But nobody's going for the mainstream anymore.
No.
So.
One of the main problems you can see is the commercial break of any of those channels. It's like who is funding these channels, and that's they're getting that advertisement money. So when you see an advertisement from Big Pharma, or you see an advertisement from, say, Boeing, I've seen advertisements from Northrop Grumman. What can I even buy from them? I can't buy anything from them.
Exactly.
What products do they have?
Exactly.
So why do they need an advertisement?
Right.
What they're not selling anything per se. But what they are doing is they are buying coverage. They're paying top dollar for those ads in primetime spots, and that puts a lot of money into these networks. So, these networks are looking at it as, hey, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, whoever just paid us a whole lot of money. Now they're having this, now there's a strike at their company or whatever, but we don't want to talk about that necessarily. We don't want, our partners to have that bad look. So we're just going to ignore the strike, or there was they got caught doing something with bad safety. We're not going to talk about that. Or they got caught lobbying a certain congressman with a huge amount of money. We're not going to talk about any of that because these are the people that pay our salaries. So that's what you're seeing. When you see CNN host a presidential debate on healthcare, and then go to commercial in a presidential debate, which shouldn't happen anyways. It's a presidential debate. It shouldn't be a profit motive, but they go to a commercial and it's for Big Pharma and it's for health insurance. And here we are in a debate about Medicare for all versus health insurance.
So we're depending on these news outlets to investigate whatever matters. And, the corporate world is so dominant in our culture. If the news media is not investigating and reporting on the corporate world, then they're not doing their job or anything close.
Right. They're the fourth estate. They're literally there to hold government accountable. That's what they're supposed to do. But it's gone from accountability to access. So you can't get access to your favorite congressman, senator, whoever, if you're writing bad articles about them, or if you're
So
talking.
what's the solution to that? What
Solution to that is
policies
that
do we need to change?
we need to take the profit motive out of the media, first and foremost. If the amount of profit that the media is looking at depends on which kind of news they're running, then we need to take that profit out and just say, hey, cover what people need to know, cover the news,
So who
keep us
supports
informed.
the media? I mean, if it's just government funded, and if government gets to make the call as to what's news and what's not, I mean, how do we do what I agree that profit motive is harmful in the media, but how do we change that? It would seem that some type of public funding and public support is necessary to have a media that is not sold out to the corporate world. But how do you do that without the government being in the role of censorship?
And that's where independent media has that model in place. As we continue to grow it, we're still small change compared to cable news, but we have the model. And that model is funding from your viewership or your readership. So, we see people like Lee Camp, Jimmy Dore, Mike Frigaretto, Kyle Kalinske, and that's because they're viewers. Take care of them through Patreon and these other methods. So they are accountable to their viewers. Like what we're doing now, we're not making any money off this. So we're talking about how we feel, what we know. There's nobody paying us to say anything that we're saying. If I could ever get my show to grow enough to where people want to, I can have a Patreon and whatnot, then I will be accountable to those viewers and myself, and only myself and those viewers. So I'm going to make sure that they are paying. We'll use me, for example. If I took money, they would be paying me for what it is that I provide. So I'm going to continue to provide that kind of news, cover those kind of topics that they're paying me for. And there's enough independent media that all the topics get covered, because we can't all, cover the same thing. But that is basically what we need is to be directly accountable to our readership, our viewership. So I like
Well,
that
let's
model.
talk. Yeah, I do too. Let's talk about some. So we're here. We talked last week about, independent media is so important, and we named some of our favorite independent media personalities. And this week we've decided to talk a little bit about Jimmy Dore and what do we like about him? What does he talk about? Why is he near the top of our list of media personalities? And so why do you like Jimmy Dore?
Oh man, there's so many reasons. First and foremost, he's only accountable to himself and his viewership. So whether you agree with Jimmy on a subject or not, it's coming from Jimmy. It's not coming from somebody high up that he's, being paid to take this stance or not take this stance. You're getting a true Jimmy all the time. You know what Jimmy thinks. He's going to tell you what he thinks and how he got there. He has great guests on his shows. He does good interviews. And besides the fact he's funny, obviously as a stand-up comedian, he throws the jokes in there, and that always helps. When you're talking about so much serious matter, it's good to have some jokes in there. Not necessarily tuning in for a comedy show, but we're talking about war. That's really depressing. If you can get a smile or a chuckle somewhere in there to help lighten that up, it's easier to take. But Jimmy, he's got no F's to spare. He comes on there, he says exactly what he's going to say. He will hold people account, and that's one of the things. Like, he's one of the very few people in independent media holding Bernie accountable right now.
Right.
I see him doing it. I see the Convo Couch is doing it, and who's the other guy? Poppy Chulaman, he's doing it. But really, that's about it. Crystal Ball, Hill Rising, they are as well. But Jimmy's the main one. He has come. He has talked exactly about what we were talking about with AOC, with Bernie, with all these people, and the type of leadership. He has called out the mistakes in the campaign that they ran, beyond all the other issues that there were with the rigging and this and that. Bernie had some mistakes in his campaign that could have definitely changed this. Jimmy is on top of that stuff. So you look at these people, and I look at all of them over time. Obviously not when you first find them, but I've watched Jimmy. I don't even know how long now, since well before the 2016 election. And you can look back at his videos, and he's right more often than he's wrong by a huge percentage. And so most of these people that I watch, independent wise, that have been around for a while, I'm looking at track record. If they're right time and time again, they're probably people you need to listen to, until proven otherwise. Whereas, you have people on CNN, MSNBC, they're just wrong for years and years, and they're still on MSNBC, they're still on CNN, they're still in the New York Times. It's
Yeah, Matt
unbelievable.
Taibbi says it's okay to be wrong just so you're wrong in favor of the establishment.
Right.
He says
And
that in Hate Inc. Like
yeah,
the 2008 downturn, whoever was wrong about that is okay, you know. Anyway, so I want to share what I like about Jimmy Dore.
mhm.
Well, for one thing, he cusses a lot and he calls names, so I like that. And
I wasn't gonna go there, but yeah.
I'm telling you, first thing in the morning when I'm driving on the way to work, I like to hear Jimmy Dore because I want to see him rip somebody a new one. I want to hear him rip somebody a new one. That's what I like best. Uh, but more, I mean, more to the point. So for 3 years now, uh, Rachel Maddow has been raving about Russiagate. And so
Mhm.
Russiagate is a conspiracy that I never believed it, Trump colluding with, and there probably was some, business dealings going on there. But, if you ask them what collusion is, this guy wrote an entire book on collusion, and Aaron Matei asked him, so where was the collusion? He couldn't answer. Well, you have to go back to 1984. No, where was the collusion? It's like, if you talk about the Watergate scandal, there was a crime that happened at a certain time and a certain place. Tell me what happened with Russiagate. Tell me what happened, why it was a crime, and where was the time and place that it happened. And they can't do that. And they, MSNBC and even to, I mean, almost everybody in the center, so supposedly the center, is just a new McCarthyism. And Jimmy Dore has been calling that out ever since the beginning. And it's like, how do you, he says he's a guy who smokes pot first thing in the morning and he reports out of his garage. And a guy in his garage can get it right when all these other people are getting it wrong. How does that happen? And
Right.
we could talk about how it's happened, but he's getting it right. And if it weren't for Jimmy Dore, I would not know Aaron Matei. And there's one journalist that has won awards for Russiagate coverage, and it's not Rachel Maddow. It is Aaron Matei who won an Izzy. Izzy stands for I.F. Stone. It was the nickname of I.F. Stone, who was a wonderful independent reporter in his day. Before the internet, he wrote a newsletter that out of his basement. He was a terrific investigative reporter. So Aaron Matei is the only reporter that has won an award for coverage of Russiagate, and Aaron Matei is the one who he has an intimate knowledge of the facts, and he's saying there is nothing to see here, nothing happened, and then as a result of it, you have MSNBC being more hawkish than Trump. Trump is you have them just constantly harping for war. And in addition to being royally wrong, Russiagate is is a dangerous type of McCarthyist Cold War saber rattling type of theory where the Russians are always conniving against us. And another thing about Russiagate is that the people that say Trump is inept and Trump is is he inept or is he a mad genius? I mean, you got to take your pick there. But
Right.
if he's inept, if he's a royal whatever, a royal screw up, if he is, then why do you keep voting to give him more and more money? And
Right.
it's because the Nancy Pelosi's of the world are not opposed to Trump. They're just pretending to be opposed to Trump. And that's what Russiagate is all about. Find some fantastical conspiracy theory and act like, oh, Trump is wrong and bad and he's a Putin puppet. You don't have to have evidence for it. You just have to say it over and over because the truth is a lie repeated often enough. Just like Herman Goebbels said, the truth is a lie repeated often enough. And Russiagate is a lie that's been repeated often enough. So otherwise intelligent people believe that it's true, and there's nothing to it. It's just there's nothing to it. How can something so well, let me ask you, Rolf, how does something so untrue become so widely accepted?
Well, Russiagate is how you resist without actually resisting. So you give the appearance of a resistance.
The fake resistance, the McResistance,
Right,
resistance, hashtag resistance.
right. Or as I call them, the assistants. Um, you know, we couldn't elect Trump because we can't have this dangerous man anywhere near the button, right? That's what they told us in 2016. That guy, he's got access to the button. So what happens with his military budgets after he's elected? Not only did the Democrats approve it, but they threw him an extra 70 billion with a billion dollars on top of what he requested, which was already a record. They just gave it to him, but I thought he couldn't be near the button. Why would you give him an extra 70 billion? That doesn't make sense if you are actually resisting. But again, Russiagate, the way they did the Ukraine gate thing, it's how you appear to resist without resisting. It's Nancy Pelosi waiting to tear up a piece of paper behind his back while she's on camera. That's the appearance of resistance without resisting. They love his economic policies. They don't want to say it. They just feel like they can't control him. He gets on Twitter too much. He's kind of loud and crude, and he's orange, and he looks silly. So you can be evil and support military action everywhere, but you can't get on Twitter and talk about it and be a loud, crude orange guy with a wig. So that's, I guess, where the Democrats draw their line is when you're starting wars all over the world, don't be rude about it on Twitter. Have some civility.
Right.
A little civility, a little zen in your bombing. It's crazy. So that
Well,
Russiagate
that's
happens.
that's what Obama was, the friendly face of empire.
Right,
The friendly face of the prison industrial complex, the friendly face of assassinating U.S. citizens.
right.
Help me out here. The friendly face of what else? Let's talk about the Obama administration a little bit.
Well, I wanted to, before we did that,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
just with the media, how does Russiagate come to be so widely accepted? And then also I wanted to bring up the fact that the final nail was put in the coffin of Russiagate a couple of weeks ago, and it kind of slid under the media as usual. If you even needed a final nail, which most people shouldn't even need at this point. But what happens is we are indeed the most propagandized society in history. The internet has allowed that, cable news, all this, and it's just a 24-hour cycle of just Russiagate, 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 Russiagate. When you do that for months and months and months and years, and even if what you say is disproven, you just immediately move the goalpost and just jump right onto the same thing, and it's still Russia, 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 this, and you pull everybody into that wing. You pull Jill Stein, Susan Sarandon, you pull all these people, and you just forever. And we have so much of our population that relies on these sources for news, especially a lot of our older population, unfortunately. But they sit down, they've done this for 20 years, that's their routine. They sit down at night and they watch their favorite show on whichever of those networks, and that's what they believe. And they don't go and research anything. They don't critical think through the information that's been given to them. And if you tell them otherwise, they will tell you you're just wrong because so-and-so, their favorite anchor on their favorite channel, just told them otherwise. So that's how you get Russiagate. But there hasn't really been a good argument for it since the beginning. But I don't know if you saw throughout all that, Mueller indicted, what was it, 17 Russians from the troll farm. And they always want to throw that in your face. Well, if there's no proof, how do you indict these people? Well, lo and behold, a couple weeks ago, I don't know if you saw this, but the attorney for those Russians showed up. And he said, all right, court's here, let's do it. And they dropped the case. Now, why would they do that? Why would they drop that case? It's because they never expected, they knew that they were just indicting people just to indict people, to say, hey, we have these indictments. But it's a troll farm with no ties to the Russian government whatsoever, literally no ties. Their lawyer shows up and says, yeah, let's do this thing. And all they can do is, hey, all right, you called our bluff. We really don't have anything on these people. So now we have to drop it. So So yeah, of course the media didn't show that for all the reasons we've been talking about. But yeah, I'd say that's more than the final nail. They probably had to dig that coffin up from the ground just to put that nail in it. But nevertheless, there should really never be anybody pushing Russiagate anymore. They just shouldn't. I mean, it's so done. If this doesn't do it, I don't know what will. But most people didn't even, the few Russiagators out there that still exist, I'm sure they have missed this news. Because Rachel Maddow or Chris Cuomo or whoever didn't tell them.
I think a lot of people still believe it because it's just been harped on. It's like something. It has to be true if Rachel Maddow has talked about it. It has to be true. I think, you're saying that nobody believes it, or I don't know what you're saying, but I think a lot of people still believe it. And the evidence doesn't matter. What matters is the people they trust talked about it for 3 years.
Yeah. And it's, I say that I don't think too many people believe it at this point, because there was I forget who did the poll, but there was a huge poll on issues done last year of what's important to Americans. And I wish I had the details of it, but basically they went through all these issues from the economy, environment, jobs, infrastructure, so on and so forth. And Russiagate was in there. It's like, what is important to you? It was less than 1% found Russiagate to be important. And so I think a lot of people have figured it out at this point, but there are some diehards. They're going to go down with that ship no matter what. I've got a couple of friends like that are just, you can't tell them anything. Russiagate's real, and you're just crazy if you don't believe it. But where's the proof that nobody has supplied it? I'm always open to proof. You show me proof, I can roll with that. But yet, no one has provided anything. The closest it came to it were the indictments. That's been dismissed now. So what did you really ever have if you were a Russiagator?
Yeah, well, and the allegation is that Russia interfered in our elections. I mean, a couple of things to put that in perspective. I mean, the U.S. has interfered in so many elections all over the world. I mean, including Russia. That's one thing. Another thing, I mean, can we talk about how the DNC has interfered in elections? Can we talk about how the major corporations interfere with our election process and our lawmaking process? Can we talk about how Israel and Saudi Arabia interfere with our system of government? I mean, that's where the real interference is, and Russiagate is a distraction from real.
Right. Russia did not block Hillary from campaigning in swing states.
Right.
It didn't close any airports, block any roads. It didn't cause her to run the campaign on no issues that she ran. It just didn't happen. But you're absolutely spot on with that. We had actual collusion with the Obama phone calls in the primary here just weeks ago. Not Russiagate collusion, but actual collusion. That is what collusion looks like.
Right.
That's it. How are we worried about Russia when we have voting machines that can be hacked by children in mere minutes? How are we worried about Russians when we have gerrymandering all across the country? We have an electoral college. We've already had 2 presidents this century elected without the popular vote. Imagine the uproar if Venezuela had that, or Russia. How can we complain about rigged elections from Russia or anybody else interference when you're right? We do have Israel literally interfering. We have Saudi Arabia literally interfering. We have all these things going on. We don't have ranked choice voting. They're closing polling places. They are purging voter rolls. All these things, and we're not addressing
proprietary
any of that
software with these computers that are supposed to be counting votes. You have proprietary software that that is proprietary, therefore it's secret. So these corporations are keeping secret how their software even works.
Right. We had the Iowa app debacle. That was
Shadow.
Just as blatant. Yeah, that was as blatant as anything I've ever seen in elections. That's just terrible. And there's so many other things. When we're talking about all the election issues the last 4 or 5 years, there's so many of them. I can't even think of them all in one setting. But that's just a few, and that's more than enough. Now,
Well,
do we
what did
want
the
election interference from any other country? No, but we can do that by having paper ballots publicly counted. Um, we can do that
how hard is it to
blockchain
count
system.
ballots? How hard is it to count ballots by paper? I mean, this shadow app and any computerization that goes on, it's like, how hard is it to count ballots by paper? If you think you need a computer for that, we need to talk. The computer element of it is just a prescription for corruption and for election rigging.
Yep, yep. And there should be no computers involved at all. I would say the one caveat being that if that is the way that people want to go, it has to be on blockchain. Has to be. That way, it's 100% transparent, and we don't have to worry about rigging. But anybody that's trying to do any kind of digital voting off of blockchain that's not good. That's the worst direction we can go in. We need paper ballots, or we can settle for blockchain, but there's nothing else. None of this digital stuff without the blockchain.
We've got about 8 minutes. We were going to talk about empire. We can probably talk about that. I could talk about empire for an hour every week if I were
Yeah,
called
yeah.
upon. But let me say a thing or two about empire, and I'm sure we can finish out the hour with this. So to me, like I've only been a progressive for a couple of years. And prior to that, I was a moderate for about 10 years. I was still a neoliberal. For most of my life, I was a Republican and a conservative. It's just a question of how conservative and whether I was a conservative on social issues or just economic issues. But the progressive thing is a relatively recent thing with me. And the way I would describe my part of it is like you start to learn the facts about how things really work, and there's just such a stark contrast about how things really work versus what we're taught in school and what we're taught in the media. I mean, I used to be the original patriot. I can go back on Facebook a few years, and on July 4th I was writing just the most I was writing stuff that was very pro-American. And that's because I didn't understand. I bought into this idea that America is about spreading freedom and democracy and prosperity all around the world. And I learned that that's just not the case. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would let people make up their own mind, but damn it, they would know the facts about the truth about our empire. And, the empire started when with genocide of the Native Americans. It started with slavery, and then around about 1900, we had conquered the mainland United States, and then there was the Spanish-American War, in which we acquired Puerto Rico and Cuba and the Philippines and Guam. But the U.S. is a straight up is an empire which might be defined as its domination of foreign countries for the purpose of exploiting them. And the reason that should be of concern to the average citizen is that, like Michael Parenti says, the republic pays for the empire. So the republic refers to our democracy, and we absolutely pay for the empire. So we pay our tax dollars so that the Defense Department has a lot of weapons, so that the military can go all over the world dominating and subjugating on behalf of corporations. It's like General Smedley Butler said, I was what does he say? There was a word for it. I was an errand boy for Wall Street. So, I mean, the military is an errand boy for Wall Street. The military exists not to protect you and me. They exist to advance the interests of U.S. corporations. And that's one of the main things that I would like for people to know about empire.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those things, we were talking earlier about being the most propagandized society in history. Is we really need a mass awakening. We need people to kind of see what the system for what it is, but to learn, we've got a lot that we need to unlearn first, because we've been taught so many things and they're not true. And to progress past that and to learn and move forward, we're going to have to push some of those old things to the side, and so that's harder, harder than it
Let me
sounds. But
share with
we've
you.
got a lot to unlearn.
Let me share. It might have been Mark Twain who said this, but he said, it's not what we it's not what we know. It's not what we don't know that's the problem. It's what we
It's what we think
know,
we
but
know.
just ain't. What we think we know, but just ain't so. So
Yeah.
there's so much that we think we know about what the U.S. is about, but it just ain't so. I mean, look at, Vietnam just as an example. There's not enough time to get into it, but if compare what the Japanese did to Pearl Harbor with what we did to Vietnam. I mean, the Japanese killed about 2,500 Americans in an attack on an imperial outpost. It was a military complex that they attacked. Whereas with Vietnam, the United States is responsible for the death of at least 3 million people. And we're basically slaughtering innocent civilians. Most of the people that were killed were not carrying a weapon, and the people, the idea of South Vietnam is a complete fiction. There was no South Vietnam except insofar as it was a puppet regime, just myth after myth after myth
Yeah, we
about
went
what
there
that
based
war
on a
was even
lie.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Okay.
Gulf of
Well,
Tonkin.
tell me about that.
Just the whole Gulf of Tonkin incident. Basically, a ship was downed. Um, in the they had the Gulf there by Vietnam, and basically they used a downed ship as a reason for us to go there. But then it turns out that that's not what happened at all. But we were already involved, so there's no looking back at that point. I don't know all the details on Gulf of
Right.
Tonkin. Essentially, it's just a lie of a downed ship that we went to war over, and it never actually happened. So that's what kicked all that off.
Rolf, we've got about 3 minutes left. What would we like for people to know?
Um, let me say, just always, like in my show, just always think critically. You're in your daily life, you're going to come across so much news, so many sources, so many people telling you this, but don't just accept it for what it is. Just think it through. A lot of the stuff you can just debunk with a minute or two of thought. So always think critically. And then, I'm going to shamelessly do a shameless plug right here real quick.
Please do.
But yeah, I do a local show. It's called the Louisville Proactivist Report. Please follow me if you're into local news. I cover Louisville and Kentucky news. But basically, I go out and I cover events such as rallies and protests, or I do sit-down interviews with local candidates and local activists, which is kind of how we met to begin with. But it's Louisville Proactivist Report, all one word. That's on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. And, I'm just out here, trying to be the megaphone for the community, give a voice to people who are doing work in the community and just need to be heard more. We
Well,
don't hear
what
that.
motivated you to start that in about a minute or less?
Doing activism for years, just accomplishing so little. It feels like I wanted to try a new strategy, which I can't explain the whole thing in a minute, but basically part of that strategy was to be a megaphone for the community, and instead of just being one more guy with a sign at a rally, actually try to share that rally around to more people and increase that voice and hopefully increase the knowledge with that. And, last but not least, hopefully, inspire people who see these people on my show working for what they care about. Hopefully that translates to the screen, and somebody who's just watching says, hey, if they can work on that and make a difference, I can work on the issue I care about, maybe make a difference. So that's as quick as I can put it. But yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, it's not covered really in our news. So I try to take that lane and cover it. So yes, throw me a like and a follow. And, right now I can't really do it because of the pandemic. My show is out in public, so it's not very pandemic proof, but I will be back as soon as the pandemic's over. I'm going to be out
Sounds
there
great.
doing some
Louisville
stuff. So
Proactivist Report. Rolf, thanks
yes,
for
sir.
joining me. We'll do this again soon.
And thank you, Hart. Have a good day.
Okay, you too.